What if I told you that disciplined people don't rely on willpower at all? They've trained their brain to crave hard things the same way you crave scrolling or junk food. That's not motivation, that's conditioning. Right now, your brain is addicted to easy rewards, which is why discipline feels painful. But once you understand dopamine detox, you can reprogram your brain to actually enjoy effort, focus, and consistency. And once that switch flips, everything changes. Picture this. It's Sunday evening. You've had every intention of starting: the workout, the book, the project, the habit you promised yourself 3 months ago. The day was yours, and somehow 6 hours disappeared into a screen. You weren't even fully enjoying it. You were just there, present enough to keep scrolling, but absent enough that you can't remember what you watched. And the strangest part? You felt guilty the entire time, which means some part of you knew better. Some part of you wanted something different. So why didn't it stop? That's the question most people never ask clearly enough. They blame laziness. They blame lack of willpower. They blame their personality, their upbringing, their circumstances. But none of those things are the actual answer. The actual answer is sitting inside the chemistry of your own brain, and it's been quietly running the show without your permission. Illusion versus reality. Here's what most people believe about discipline. They believe it's a personality trait, something you either have or you don't. The person who wakes up at 5 a.m., journals, exercises, builds their business, they must be wired differently, more motivated, more driven, stronger somehow, in ways that are just biological. And here's the deeper assumption underneath that belief. If discipline is a trait, then struggling with it is a flaw, which means every time you fail to follow through, it's not a system problem, it's a you problem. That's the illusion, and it's a painful one, because it turns every unfinished habit into evidence of inadequacy. The reality is radically different. Psychologist Benjamin Bloom spent decades studying high performers, musicians, chess grandmasters, Olympic athletes, scientists. What he found shattered the born talented myth entirely. Almost none of them showed exceptional early promise. What they shared instead was structured practice, responsive feedback, and, crucially, environments that made effort feel meaningful. Bloom wasn't studying willpower, he was studying conditioning. And Howard Gardner, the Harvard psychologist who gave us the theory of multiple intelligences, added another layer. Humans don't have one fixed intelligence. We have many different ways of being capable, many different ways of finding flow. Which means the person struggling with discipline isn't broken. They may simply be using the wrong mode of engagement for how their brain naturally learns and grows. Put those two ideas together, and something important emerges. Discipline isn't about force, it's about fit. It's about designing an environment and a practice that works with your brain's reward system, not against it. But first, you have to understand what your brain is actually doing when it resists. Let's talk about dopamine. Not the way social media talks about it, as a villain, a drug, something to fear. Let's talk about it clearly.
Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That's the first myth to dissolve. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It fires before the reward, not during. It's the neurological signal that says, this is worth pursuing. It creates craving, motivation, seeking behavior. And here's what modern neuroscience has confirmed. Your brain doesn't care what the dopamine comes from. It just responds to the spike. A notification, a snack, a like on a post, a slot machine. They all trigger the same circuit. Now imagine you've spent years, consciously or not, training that circuit to respond to instant stimulation, fast, easy, predictable. Your brain has been quietly learning that effort is unrewarded, that discomfort leads nowhere, that the fastest path to feeling okay is a small, cheap hit of something easy. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. The problem isn't that you're lazy.
The problem is that your brain has been enrolled in a curriculum you didn't choose, and it graduated with honors. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting. When you try to be disciplined inside that conditioned brain, something uncomfortable happens. The hard thing, the workout, the study session, the creative work, doesn't feel neutral. It feels wrong. The absence of easy stimulation feels like punishment. Your nervous system interprets the discomfort of focus as danger, and it screams at you to stop. That feeling isn't weakness, it's withdrawal. You're not failing at discipline, you're experiencing the neurological friction of two competing reward systems, and the older, faster, more practiced one is winning. But here's what nobody tells you. That friction is the exact signal that growth is happening. Bloom called this the threshold of generative discomfort, the zone where your existing competence ends and real learning begins. Gardner's research echoed this. Meaningful engagement always involves productive struggle, not endless suffering, but real, honest friction. Confusion isn't failure. Resistance isn't weakness. They're the door. So what is a dopamine detox really? Strip away the viral oversimplification. It's not about suffering in silence for a weekend or swearing off your phone forever. That's performance. It's aesthetic discipline without neuroscientific understanding. The real dopamine detox is a recalibration. Let me explain it the way Richard Feynman would, simply, clearly, from the ground up. Imagine your brain's reward sensitivity is like a volume dial. Years of high stimulation inputs, social media, processed food, binge content, constant noise, have turned that dial all the way up, which means normal life sounds like silence. Reading a book feels boring, going for a walk feels pointless, sitting with a task for 30 minutes feels unbearable. You haven't lost the ability to focus. The dial is just calibrated too high for quiet things to register. A dopamine detox turns the dial back down, slowly, deliberately. By removing high stimulation inputs for a defined period, you allow your baseline dopamine sensitivity to reset. And when it resets, the quiet things start to sound louder. Work starts to feel more rewarding. Small progress starts to feel meaningful again. Your brain isn't broken, it's been overstimulated. Now here's what most people miss, and this is where Bloom's mastery learning framework becomes essential. Bloom's research showed that the biggest predictor of long-term mastery wasn't talent or even practice hours. It was feedback loops. People who got clear, timely feedback on their progress learned faster, stayed more engaged, and, critically, began to enjoy the process more deeply over time. Apply that to discipline. A dopamine detox works best not as a one-time event, but as the beginning of a new feedback architecture. You remove the cheap stimulation, you replace it with activities that have natural feedback loops. Exercise gives you physical feedback. Creating something gives you visible progress. Reading gives you the subtle but real feedback of ideas connecting. Those feedback loops train your brain to associate effort with reward, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. And this is the neurological truth underneath it all. You are not repressing your reward system, you are redirecting it. You're teaching your dopamine circuit to seek harder things because harder things start to carry the signal, this is worth pursuing. That's not willpower, that's reconditioned craving. But here's where it goes deeper than technique. Because you can understand everything I just said, the neuroscience, the feedback loops, the recalibration, and still not change. And if that happens, it's not because the science is wrong, it's because the identity hasn't shifted. Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences carried a quiet philosophical message beneath the academic surface. Intelligence is not a fixed quantity. It's a dynamic relationship between a person, their environment, and the problems they choose to engage with. Which means who you are as a learner, as a builder, a creator, a thinker, is not settled. It's being continuously authored. You are not a person who lacks discipline. You are a person who has not yet built the identity of someone who finds effort rewarding. That distinction matters more than any technique, because identity is self-fulfilling. If you believe you are undisciplined, every moment of struggle confirms that belief. But if you begin, even tentatively, even awkwardly, to see yourself as someone in the process of recalibrating, someone experimenting with a new reward architecture, the same struggle becomes data instead of evidence. Mastery, Bloom found, is not the absence of struggle. It's the presence of a learner who has developed what he called metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own learning, notice what's working, and adjust without collapsing. In plain language, the disciplined person isn't the one who never wants to quit. They're the one who notices the urge to quit, gets curious about it, and keeps going anyway, not through force, but through understanding. That shift from force to understanding is the identity transformation. And it begins the moment you stop asking, "Why can't I do this?" and start asking, "What is my brain trying to protect me from? And is that protection still serving me?" When you start to see the world through this lens, something unexpected happens. Problems stop feeling like obstacles. They start feeling like invitations. The hard project, the uncomfortable conversation, the unfamiliar skill, instead of triggering avoidance, they begin to trigger something closer to curiosity. Not always, not perfectly, but increasingly, with practice. This is what neuroscientist Andrew Huberman describes as effort-based reward, the phenomenon where your brain begins to release dopamine not at the completion of a task, but during the effort itself. That's the switch. That's what disciplined people have that feels, from the outside, like supernatural willpower. They're not suppressing the desire for pleasure. They've moved the pleasure. Effort is the reward. Consistency is the drug. And here's the worldview that becomes available to you once that shift happens. You stop outsourcing your sense of progress to outcomes. A workout that doesn't change your body yet still becomes valuable. A chapter written badly still counts. A meditation session where your mind wandered the entire time still built the circuit, because you've learned to find meaning in the act of showing up, not just in what the showing up produces. This is what Gardner was pointing at with multiple intelligences, not just that people are smart in different ways, but that engagement itself transforms the learner. The act of sustained effort in any domain rewires the brain's relationship with difficulty. You become someone who is less afraid of hard things, not because hard things get easier, but because you get more intimate with the process of doing hard things, and that intimacy dissolves the fear. And something creative opens up inside that space, because creativity isn't the absence of constraint, it's what happens when a trained mind moves freely within structure. Discipline doesn't kill creativity. It enables it. The musician who has practiced scales for 10,000 hours doesn't think about scales anymore. They think about music. The writer who has built a daily writing habit doesn't fight the blank page anymore. They sit down and begin. Discipline is not the enemy of freedom. It's the architecture that makes a certain kind of freedom possible. So let me leave you with this. At the start of this, I told you that disciplined people don't rely on willpower, and by now I hope that statement has expanded in meaning for you. Because it's not really about hacking your dopamine. It's not really about a detox weekend or a 5 a.m. wake-up time. It's about something quieter and more fundamental. It's about choosing, slowly, imperfectly, with full knowledge of how uncomfortable it will sometimes feel, to become someone whose internal world is no longer run entirely by the path of least resistance. It's about recognizing that your brain has been enrolled in a curriculum designed by the attention economy, and deciding, with as much gentleness as firmness, to enroll it in something else. Bloom spent his life believing that any person, given the right conditions and enough time, could achieve mastery at almost anything, not because talent is irrelevant, but because talent is vastly less deterministic than we pretend. Gardner spent his life saying that intelligence is not a single fixed thing. It's a living, expanding relationship between who you are and what you engage with. Together, they point at the same truth. You are more capable of change than your current experience of yourself suggests. So here's the question I want to leave sitting with you, not to be answered quickly, but to be carried for a while. What would your life look like if effort felt like home? Not a place you visit reluctantly, not a discipline you impose on yourself out of guilt, but home, the place your brain returns to naturally, because somewhere along the way you taught it that hard things are where aliveness lives. You don't need to believe that yet. You just need to be curious about whether it might be true. That curiosity, quiet, patient, and honest, is where the rewiring begins.